In this Copilot Unplugged video, I want to talk about generating summaries of reports using the Copilot pane. Now you can generate summaries of reports in many different ways, but I specifically want to focus on the Copilot pane in Power BI Desktop and the Power BI service. I want to walk through some examples, and I want to illustrate how summaries can be potentially interesting or helpful, since they can also highlight parts of the report where you should pay attention, but they can also be quite dangerous, misleading, and rather unhelpful or inefficient, because in general, it can take more time to read through that summary than it can to actually look at the report. So let's look at the report that we're going to use today. This report is a simple month-to-date daily sales report. It's the same report I've used for several of the other videos. I'm going to make it publicly available from my website when I get time, and honestly, when I get energy. So what it shows is it shows the gross sales versus a target for a single selected month. We also have a breakdown by sales region, highlighting the regions that are contributing the most to our gap, so versus the target. And then we have a breakdown by a customer segment, customer key accounts, and a general trend by workdays month to date for the actuals and the target. As I've showed in previous videos, this is a very interactive report. You can change the measure from sales to orders. You can change the target from budget to 1 year prior or 2 years prior. And you can even change the units from, for example, looking at the value to looking at the quantity, or even looking at the invoice lines, for instance. So what we're going to do is I'm going to restore it over here back to a comparison versus the budget for gross sales value, August 2022. And we're going to ask Copilot to summarize this report page. Now, before I do that, I want to ask a question. Why would someone do this? Now, I can think of a number of different scenarios. The first one is that someone might be new to Power BI, new to the report page, new to the organization, or new to this particular data. And they might just be looking for an explanation where they didn't receive one from a person, so some kind of onboarding, or they didn't receive one from any documentation or videos or anything like this, or at least they didn't look at it. So in this instance, in this scenario, I would expect that Copilot is basically filling a gap that a human should provide. I would expect that if someone is new to a report, that they're hopefully getting an explanation of it from someone else, some kind of onboarding. But the reality is that that often doesn't happen because people don't have time, or they just don't think that it's important, unfortunately. So that is the first scenario, if someone is new. The second scenario could be if someone is lost or confused, like if they don't really know what they're looking at, and again, they're kind of looking for some help where a human is not providing it. The third scenario that I'm thinking of is they're kind of trying to think through the report, or they're trying to look for ideas or to know where they should pay attention and what they should do with this information. This third scenario is where I get a bit concerned, and I will explain why as I go through some examples. Let's first start with something really, really basic, and let's just ask Copilot for a summary. So I'm going to open the Copilot pane, and I'm going to ask, summarize the current report page. Now, I already asked this before, so I would expect it was cached, but for some reason, it's taking a while, so I'm assuming it wasn't. And let's look at what we have here. So it's correctly identified that we're looking at gross sales performance, sales trends, territory performance, and key accounts. So that's good, but that's also the same information that we would get by looking at these visuals. Then we get some bullet points explaining to us what we have, and it also references the charts. So first, what I really like that it references the charts and that this is interactive. You have a tooltip saying what the chart is, and it shows the title of that chart. And if you select it, it then focuses or highlights it. I think that's a very intuitive experience, and I think that this is a good way to be able to read something and then go here for more details or more information. What I don't like is that these explanations, these summaries, are very verbose. Honestly, it takes me longer to read these summaries than it does for me to just glance at the report. My personal perspective is that when you're looking at an explanatory report, as opposed to an exploratory report, explanatory reports are typically trying to answer a particular question or solve a particular problem, And if they are good reports, they're doing that in a very time efficient and effective way. In my opinion, the goal of people when they come to a report is not to use the report. The goal is to answer a question, answer a problem, or to know whether there are questions or problems that they should be answering and addressing. What that means is that people like sales account managers or territory directors, these kind of things, the users of your reports, their job is not to look at the report. The report is just a tool that they're using in order to do their actual tasks. So if the report is effective, they should be minimizing the time that they're spending looking on it to the absolute minimum. They should be spending as little time as possible on the report, getting the information and details they need, and then making the decisions and taking the actions that they need to take. For every minute or hour that they have to spend digging through reports, that's time that they could be spending on other tasks. Now, this is different when you're working with exploratory reports, because in exploratory reports, of course, you're trying to dig through and understand the data, and you're kind of trying to understand new ideas. It's not more of a targeted experience, and it's, as the name suggests, a more exploratory experience. But in regular reports, I really think that it should be an efficient experience, and I don't find these summaries to be very efficient. That said, it's my subjective opinion, and research does show that people can interpret information better if it is both visual and text. So certainly for people, particularly who are less familiar or comfortable with visuals, might greatly benefit from having this written summary. However, you should be able to look at a report and quickly, in 3 seconds, be able to get an overview. This is our sales. We're on target. This is how we're trending. Then in 30 seconds, we should be able to filter and zoom to what's important. For example, the territories that are most off target or the key accounts that are more off target. And then in 300 seconds, we should be able to get details on demand. So this 330-300 rule is something I feel very strongly about from a layout and design point of view. And I really think that that is something that is fundamentally broken when you are looking at a summary like this, because you're just kind of confronted with a wall of text. And if this is the summary, think about when we're going to be asking for more details or thinking through some more details, because it's certainly going to be taking you a couple minutes to read through all of this. That said, let's dive into it a little bit farther. So it is correctly reading the sales target and the sales. So it's saying, hey, the gross sales reached the target. Great. Again, that's something we could see by just glancing over here and looking at the color and the check mark. It says the highest actuals was recorded on the 15th workday, showing significant overperformance of the sales target, generating an excess of 38.43 million. So this is interesting. It's referring to the 15th workday, and it's saying that this is the workday when we had the highest actuals. But of course, that's normal. It's accumulating. If we had anything else, then I would be worried that there's some very serious issues going on here with our data model. This is not actually a very relevant finding, because the cumulative number should always be, the last number should always be the highest. So it's just telling us what the difference is here on the last two, and really what the difference is then in total. So if anything, I think that this has a risk of confusing and misleading people into thinking that the 15th workday was special for some reason, and they might then spend time trying to understand what is the 15th workday in terms of a date, and second, why is it so special? Because I wouldn't expect the average user to be able to say like, oh, well, this is just accumulating, so it's just telling me something common sense. They might read this and actually interpret, oh, I should pay attention to the 15th workday. What is the 15th workday? And we haven't even moved on to the next bullet points. So this is a very simple example of when things can get misleading. But once we get to the actual business semantics of customers and regions, then things really get hairy, honestly. So sales trends, we're just going to skip over that because we already talked about it. Territory performance. So this is a sci-fi data set. Earth and Sol 3 Gate emerged as strong performers. Conversely, Laconia 2 and Laconia 9 saw the most significant shortfalls, underperforming by this much. So it's interesting because it chooses to highlight these top two, which, may or may not be the ones that a user tends to focus on. So it highlights the bottom two and the top two here, but there's not really a clear reason as to why it's highlighting those. And indeed, of course, a user would most likely look at this one first and try to say, whoa, what the heck is going on here? But I think it's also wrong to neglect the others, particularly because we've made a conscious choice to format them. So in this case, a user might look at this and say, okay, it's highlighting these two, but why are these other ones red? And this indicates two things. First of all, there's a communication that's been chosen by the report developer to use red to highlight those that are, in this case, in a Pareto, contributing the most to our gap, but that's not communicated to the user. Copilot, however, is trying to explain and highlight something else. So this then creates a conflict between what the report visuals are trying to say in their formatting and the ambiguity therein, and what Copilot is trying to say in its summary. So again, this is something that can actually confuse users more than it can actually help them potentially. And that's not to say that the summary is bad. I'm just trying to highlight some of these nuances and think through it with the user's perspective, particularly if this is a report that I need to make decisions about my commercial territory or my key accounts. So let's keep going. Let's look at the key accounts. So Antarctic Corporation and Andromeda Shipyard showed the best overperformance. Private Contract and Sigil Interstellar underperformed against their targets by this much. So again, it chooses to highlight Private Contract and Sigil Interstellar. It doesn't highlight some of the others that also underperformed, like Miller Space or Aminokano Navy in this case. So it chose to highlight, for instance, Sigil Interstellar, even though its underperformance is really minor compared to, for example, Miller Space. So again, it's very confusing about why it's choosing to highlight some things rather than others. Now, let's ask it another question, and let's be more, let's say, sentimental here, for lack of a better term. Let's say, what insights in this report should I pay the most attention to as a key account manager, let's say. And then let's see what Copilot says. So again, this is Unplugged. I haven't written this prompt before. So, okay. So as a key account manager, you should focus on the following insights: which accounts are overperforming. So this is the same information as before. Which accounts are underperforming. So again, it also highlights those. I suspect it would give me a different answer because it's taking, if I did this in a clean chat window, because it's taking the context of the Copilot chat with it. So this is basically the same information that we had up above. So is this, honestly. So what is overperforming? This is basically a regurgitation of what we had up here. So that's a bit frustrating. So let's close it and then let's reopen it and let's try again. So what insights in this report should I pay the most attention to as a key account manager? So already when I'm typing this, I'm thinking like, if you're a key account manager, typically you're not, looking at all key accounts. You're looking at one or at most a couple key accounts that you're responsible for. So I would actually expect that Copilot might come back with some, information based on the training data of what a key account manager is. They're typically someone responsible for a key account. And then it would say something like, well, you should pay attention to your key account, for example, and then walk through and explain. Now, additionally, this is an overview report that just provides some basic information, but something that would be interesting for me would be if Copilot would tell me, hey, if you're responsible for Miller Space, click on Miller Space, and it will then filter the other visuals and tell you how, for example, Miller Space is performing in these other territories. I'm going to change the edit interactions here to filtering instead of cross-highlighting so it's easier to read. That should have been done already before. So suggesting an action like cross-filtering. So this is something that I don't think would be unreasonable to expect from Copilot, because it's a general suggestion that you would give most people when they're using a report. Like, if I am responsible for key accounts, what could I do? Well, click on it. The first thing you should do is click on it, because then you get cross-filtering. And Copilot, I would expect, should have that information based off of the metadata for interactions, that clicking on it will interact with other things. I don't think that's unreasonable to expect. So that's my expectation if I'm thinking from the point of view of a user who is a key account manager. But what I know is going to happen is Copilot is probably just going to summarize some very superficial details about, what we see in the visuals here. Okay. So we have the account performance. So it's highlighting a few accounts: Andromeda Systems, Shipyards, Macrohard Systems, so on. Notable declines, private contracts. Again, it's only highlighting private contracts so far. It's not highlighting the others. And customer satisfaction. So it's interesting that it highlights that. So because there's nothing in this model about customer satisfaction. There's nothing in this data about customer satisfaction. So exhibited strong performance, an increase, which might suggest high customer satisfaction and effective account management. Well, if I'm the key account manager of Walla Ship Repair, then I'm getting a pat on the back from Copilot, so that's nice. So Antarctica Corporation, it would be funny if it told me the opposite, honestly. So if it told me, hey, you're being a bad account manager, so they're not meeting their targets, you're not doing your job. That's funny. So okay, yeah, customer sentiment, sure. So I don't think that's true. That's definitely not true, because this is fundamentally misleading. Because actually in this model, the business process of how this is designed is customers place account like orders. Those orders are ordered for future dates, and a lot of the times those orders are based off of fixed contracts that exist, annualized contracts. So whether a customer is satisfied or not is not necessarily going to be reflected by their current month's sales, but more by a general trend. For example, if I was looking at a report that looked at the rolling 12-month, sum of sales or something like this, or the moving average of the sales, and we saw it going down or going up, you might be able to extrapolate with something like that. But this is overreaching and saying that it has something about sentiment. So significant patterns and trends. So it exceeded the budget of the 15 workdays mentioned. Strong early performance, achieving targets early within the period. So that's true, but I think it's more about consistent achievement and then territory. So it's kind of just highlighting the same thing again here. So these form the backbone of strategic adjustments and resource allocation to optimize both customer satisfaction and sales performance. Okay. So again, I don't actually think this is very useful. And I think what would be more interesting is, because this is a tool in Power BI, I'm using it to engage with a Power BI report, I would expect that it should say something about, cross-filtering. So maybe let's try to be more explicit. Let's try to be better with our prompts, and let's say what should I do with this report? Let's first start and say, I'm responsible for the key account, Miller Space. What should I do with this report to better understand the performance of my key account? Explain what actions I should take or what I might click on. So here I'm kind of trying to be really explicit and just say okay, I have the report, how do I use it? So maybe even say how should I use this report? And then I expect Copilot to say something about, hey, filter to Miller Space, filter to your account to get some more information. And if we're lucky, it might also say hey, click on it. Okay. So filter by account. Here we go. Use the report's filtering options, drill down. So this is unfortunate because we don't actually have any drill down on Miller Space. And I would expect that it should know that because it has that context. Maybe I'm kind of being unrealistic. Look at the percentage change, historical sales. So I can access that by changing the filters. breakdown by product and service. So we don't have any product information here, unfortunately, but that might at least give me an idea of where I could go next. So I actually like that it suggested this, even though it doesn't know what we're selling. So it's still trying to make a generic product or service. And it's, again, mentioning customer satisfaction, feedback, and surveys. So this is kind of getting a bit out of scope of the report. And repeat business. This is something that, you know, it would be very difficult to be able to look at this inside the scope of what we have. I honestly think that this might go first because the context of we're looking at a Power BI report, even though I know it's putting it last because we asked it last. Look at charts and graphs. Yes. Okay. I'll look at charts. I'll look at charts and graphs. And then set alerts. So I think this is also interesting. This is also helpful. But if the report allows set up alerts. So I feel like that's kind of a missed opportunity because it would be interesting for it to actually tell me how I could do that. Like if it could then tell me like, hey, number 1, filter to Miller space. Number 2, set an alert for Miller space or create a subscription, like create a subscription to the report, for example. Even though we're working in Power BI desktop, like it could still explain how to do this in the Power BI service or something like this. So, but at least it's telling us that we should filter to the account, use the report's filtering option. So it's still not very specific. I would love it if it could really just say like, click on Miller space in the table. That would be interesting and helpful. All right, so sorry I had to go to my door. Someone rang the doorbell, but it's unplugged, so I don't care. All right, so in summary here, and this is just kind of an initial summary, is that this could potentially lead to some breadcrumbs toward interesting actions or toward some interesting ideas. But ultimately, I think these summaries are very verbose. I think that they have the risk of being confusing. They have a risk of being misleading, especially for people who are not native English speakers. So that is in Power BI Desktop. Let's see if it differs at all in the Power BI service. So let's just click the button. What is this report about? Give me a concise summary of content. So it says concise, so I expect this to be not as verbose as in Power BI Desktop. It's the same report otherwise. It's almost the same. So it's just a few less words. I like this better because it is more concise. I really don't like this because it's cumulative. It shouldn't just be telling me what is the highest on Workday 15. That's the lowest on Workday 1. That's kind of the worst because it's just accumulating. A significant part a significant correlation between the actuals month to date and the sales target month to date. So yeah, it would be weird if they weren't correlated, I guess. Then you'd be in trouble. And then it's highlighting some of the top performers. And interestingly, it's just picking 3. So it's just consistently picking with 3 bullet points. Perhaps that's how it's set up. And it's interesting. It's talking about the order lines here. Is the order lines in the tooltip? Oh yeah, so that's interesting that it's getting the information from the tooltip as well. So I do like that. But that has the fact that it doesn't tell me that, like at first I thought this was a mistake. So that's actually something that I also think can be confusing, is that it should also be able to say something about like, hey, the order lines, that this is actually coming from the tooltip. It's not coming from the actual visual itself. Although it does say here, and order lines by territory. Probably a change I made when I was testing around. So calculated insights, largest positive variance between actuals month to date and sales on Workday 15, surpass the targets, and positive correlation. So calculated insights. So I can see that it's doing some calculations, I guess. Like that's I guess perhaps one of the next steps or one of the next features is that like when people ask Copilot things, it can do some calculations of its own. I think that's interesting, but there's also a ton of risk for that because a correlation between actuals month to date and the sales target month to date is fundamentally irrelevant in this report. And honestly, I think by the time someone could have read this whole summary, they could have probably, like, thinking to who's looking at this report, probably like a territory director, account manager. They could probably say, like, ah, yes, this is, things are going wrong here. Click it, look at more of the details, focus on the key accounts that have the biggest problems, and then go from there. But here we're kind of being misled into thinking about that there's something special about the private contract. There's something special about Workday 15, this correlation, which just is nonsense. So I think that there is an opportunity for this being helpful, but I think that there is also a potential for this being extremely misleading again. So let's do another thing. Let's prep a summary, executive summary for this report, be concise, use a bulleted list. So again, because it was very verbose, it's going to do something more concise. And I'm expecting that we're basically going to get the same information that we had up here, just rephrased in a slightly different way. So then we're going to ask the same question, like, what are some key insights that I should pay attention to here? So yeah, it's basically the same information that we had before. So let's close the Copilot pane and reopen it, start fresh. And let's just say, what are some key insights in this report that I should pay attention to? I'm the key account manager for Miller Space. And let's just see what it comes up with. So it tells us what Miller Space has an actuals month to date of this much and is underperforming. So I like that it immediately focuses with information that's relevant for me. And then it gives us some broader context. Surpassing the targets from the territory perspective. And that's just giving an overview. So again, I think it would be the next thing that it should say right away, honestly, is you should filter to Miller Space or something like this. Or I don't think Copilot can yet apply the filter itself, but just suggesting click on Miller Space or filter on Miller Space, that's something that would be interesting because it's kind of just regurgitating the same simple information over and over. I'm interested in this dig deeper. So let's see this. Oh, this is ask a question about the data, of course. So what stands out in the data? Identify the top insights or unusual events and show them in a bulleted list. Use one short sentence for each. So it's focusing on Miller Space, probably because of the context from the chat window, which I like because obviously I've said that I'm Miller Space. But then it's just repeating again the same information that we had here, which is unfortunate. Is there anything critical that I should follow up on? So I think what we're learning from some of these, it's just repeating the same information basically over and over again. So, I mean, it is a very basic report, so it doesn't have a whole lot to go off of. But for example, like the fact that we have the drill down here, so we could go to a lower level, but that's not something that, is being leveraged. So the drill down. Or the fact that we have other reports, that we could potentially have, other pages that we could potentially have. So I think in summary, what we can learn from these summaries is that they could potentially be useful. I think in those circumstances, like when people are new, when they want the text to be able to help them to interpret the visuals, it could be interesting. I think to avoid those verbose responses, it's important to be able to ask Copilot to be concise and to be specific in how you want that result to return. However, I think ultimately it's important to be aware that Copilot can, in best case scenario, distract people from what's important and cause them to spend more time reading the summary than actually looking through the report. Or in the worst case scenario, it could actually mislead them into thinking that certain things are important or relevant when they're not, like how it seems to be focusing so much on this 15th workday and the correlation between actuals and sales target. That's a complete distraction. And if anything, it's at risk of confusing people further rather than helping them. Where I would like to see this go is to have it kind of guide people in a more actionable way through using the report things that they should do in the report. So it really feels like a Copilot for the report. So it's really like giving people suggestions of what they could do in the report and how they could use it more effectively, rather than basically becoming like a redundant source of the same information. So they have the same pieces of information occurring in two different places, one in text natural language, which is a subset of the report, which is showing it then in the second way in visuals. So I think that there's still some progress to be made here in this area. And that's all I have to show for now. So that's it, and I'll see you next time.